Thank you, everyone. And I know I have an easy task because lunch is literally in 20 minutes and I have perhaps far too many slides. So bear with me. The LLM in my title doesn't stand for large language model. I'm still not a large language model, even though there are days where I might perform like one. That means I'm actually a master of laws. It's a legal degree. So what am I going to be talking to you about today? The European Health Data Space. So the European Health Data Space is an ambition, I would say, of the European Union to enable cross-border sharing of health data. And you might wonder, why haven't we got to that stage already? Well, first of all, because existing regulations, such as, for instance, the GDPR, allow member states to introduce specific national regulations that apply to certain special categories of data, and medical data, health data are such a special category of data. So there are quite some discrepancies between member states when it comes to sharing across borders of health data, and that has created also challenges for, first of all, patients, the primary bearers of such data. Why? Because when when an unfortunate something happens in life and you need to seek treatment abroad, and I can tell you, because I've had friends and friends of families of friends who have had to seek help abroad. My home country is Bulgaria. And when you need to go abroad, you have to go through an incredibly challenging procedure of actually having to translate documents. Most of the documents that you get from your physicians are actually on paper. So you usually leave the country with a paper this big, depending, of course, on what you're fighting with. And this only adds up more stress to everybody. So the ambition of the European Health Data Space is, in a way, to solve this, to really make it easy to just take your flight, go to a primary care provider in another country, and they have immediate access to your data, first of all, and then secondary use of data, which is to allow researchers, companies building new products and services to actually use health data for beneficial purposes. So to build new products and services that actually facilitate the provision of patient care. Now, has the European Health Data Space happened? Not yet. I mean, everybody's talking about it, and we have an upcoming regulation, which I want to quickly walk you through. But it's still largely an ambition, and I sincerely hope we can get there, because if there is a challenge that we need to address in the European Union, it's probably this one, because it's the one that few people feel the most. So the European Health Data Space is seen as a key pillar of the European Health Union. So in principle, the EU does not have that many competences when it comes to healthcare. And this was shown, for instance, in the response to the COVID pandemic. You know, literally we had many countries doing just whatever they wanted. And people were wondering, but why doesn't the EU intervene? Well, because the EU had no competence to do that. So every member state there is a shared competence so the EU member states have exclusive competence when it comes to this, and EU may only intervene in certain matters when it comes to health, which of course creates challenges. So now we have this ambition of creating a European Health Union, which aims to, first of all, what I mentioned already, empower individuals to take control of their health data and facilitate the exchange of data for delivery of healthcare across the EU, so primary use of data, and then foster a genuine single market for electronic health record systems, so being able to go to another country and get care immediately without having to translate documents and so on and so forth. And the secondary use of data to provide a consistent, trustworthy and efficient system for reusing health data for research, innovation, policy making and regulatory activity. So you can see it's quite broad, and this is the secondary use of data. So remember this distinction that we have: primary use of data for healthcare, for purely provision of primary care, and secondary use of data for research, for improving basically services. So not directly related to provision of care to patients. This is essentially a visual depiction of the ambition of the health data space, leading to better diagnosis and treatment, improving patient safety, continuity of care, and improved healthcare efficiency. And at the other end of the diagram, you can see better health policy, greater opportunities for research and innovation. So these are really the two main ambitions. And the idea is to create a vicious circle where you have health data stored in registries that can be accessed, electronic health data records as well, by apps and medical devices. and that, first of all, empower individuals to have control, so you can choose whom to share data and on what terms, to enable health professionals to get access to relevant health data, and of course to assist policymakers, because, you know, everybody's been, especially in the AI field these days, everybody's been talking about how can we improve policy responses, regulatory responses to new technologies. And one of the solutions that has been imported actually from abroad, so from experience gained in Singapore and the UK, is regulatory sandboxes. And regulatory sandboxes are all over the place. So they're being built in very many different industries, like for sustainability purposes, we have one in the AI Act for AI. We have in fintech sandboxes and so on. So the EU is really trying to insert provisions on sandboxes everywhere. But particularly in the healthcare domain, I think that working directly with companies and being able to learn from their experience and the challenges they are facing would actually facilitate a better and more informed, or as we call it, evidence-based approach to better lawmaking and regulatory making. Meaning we don't just intervene because we think there might be a risk. We intervene because we actually understand what the risk is and how we can mitigate it, working in collaboration with companies. So that's the idea. A company comes to our sandbox, a regulator is in the sandbox, and the two work together and advance policy together. So they're not fighting with each other, but rather they're collaborating, which of course requires a change in the paradigm of thinking, because up until now, we usually have regulators on one end, at one end of the spectrum, and companies at the other, and they're usually put in opposition. In sandboxes, we want them to collaborate and to basically make better policy making for the greater good, I hope. Of course, trust is an enabler of the European health data space. And in this sense, there are horizontal frameworks that will apply regardless of the provisions of this new regulation that is upcoming. So these horizontal frameworks apply to the entire health data sector, but the health data space regulation aims to provide some specific sectoral rules that consider, of course, the sensitivity of health data. Specifically, these are some opt-out provisions regarding primary use of data. So member states can offer complete opt-out from the infrastructures that are going to be built under the European health data space, meaning you as an individual will always have the right to say, no, I don't want my data to be part of this. Of course, we hope that most people would not say that, because we aim to facilitate trust by through these existing frameworks. So we have a framework in place that governs pretty well how personal data are managed. We have a framework which enables sharing of data with public organizations through the Data Governance Act and intermediaries. We have the Data Act, which provides access to certain end devices, to data generated by certain end devices like sensors and so on. And of course, we have the Network and Information Security and Information Systems Directive, which is the NIS2 directive on cybersecurity, which of course also applies to critical infrastructures, such as, among others, healthcare systems. And then, of course, for the secondary use, we have provisions in the European Health Data Space regulation that includes rules on opting out that build a good balance between respecting patients' wishes on one hand and ensuring that the right data is available to the right people for the public interest. Meaning, again, you can say when your data could be used, for example, for further research, for improving existing products and services and so on. You will always have that right. So the whole idea of the European Health Data Space, again, is based on the idea of individual control and user empowerment that originates from the GDPR. So what I have next, I already explained primary and secondary use of electronic health data. Perhaps some specifics from the regulation that might be of interest to you to explain really how the regulation formulates this, particularly the secondary use of electronic health data. So they say, better achieve other purposes in the healthcare and care sector that would benefit society, such as research, innovation, policy making, health threat preparedness and response, future pandemics, patient safety, personalized medicine, and so on and so forth. We already heard about initiatives in this field. And now the main principle is, of course, transparency, as in most of contemporary digital, I would say, European legislation. In this case, both healthcare providers and individuals should always have transparent access to personal health data records. Detailed information on data access should be provided. an option to enable or disable automatic notifications. This is particularly the case where, for example, a patient might not want to be informed of the outcome of a particular procedure or diagnostics automatically, because these systems actually enable automated notifications. So if there's a bad diagnosis waiting for you, you might not want to get notified by it by means of a text message. So you actually have the option to opt out. And in that case, a physician will be required to call you and schedule a meeting with you so they can explain actually the consequences. So the regulation goes to this level really of detail, of empowering the user to choose. Concerning selective sharing of health data, yes, users will be able to, data subjects, individuals will be able to restrict access to certain sensitive health data. And these restrictions would always be granular and informed, which means you can really select individual categories that you would not like to be used, for instance, for secondary purposes by R&D companies, for example. Now, of course, in an emergency situations, it may be overridden. Of course, this is driven by the experience that we've had with COVID-19. Right to object access. Member states can allow absolute right to object to access. This is something, I don't know whether member states are actually going to enforce this, but it is an option for them to adopt such provisions in national law. There are also provisions on interoperability and access for health professionals and health data access service. So now, I don't think what we have here is so important. Perhaps the important bit for you would be the cross-border healthcare situation. So now member states are obliged to participate in a digital infrastructure called MyHealth@EU. So this infrastructure is going to be built. Obviously, it's going to have to be built. And this would allow European electronic health record systems to be accompanied by an information sheet that includes information for professional users. So exactly the problem I described. You will no longer have to travel abroad if you seek care in another member state with a pack of translated documents, which might also be incomplete, and you might need to, do so many extra things on top of dealing with, for example, bad disease. When it comes to the secondary use of data, this is just a summary of what it's all about. I already covered the purposes. Why do we need to do this? It's really contributing to a general interest of society. The benefits, the immediate benefits are, of course, discovery of new medicines, development of new medical devices, healthcare products and services, and of course, a fair, hopefully, affordable and fair prices for union citizens. There will be provisions on regular access for public bodies for extended periods of time, and then research activities that include using third parties such as subcontractors, for example. These subcontractors can be engaged by public authorities, but of course the responsibility should always remain with the public body. There is particular provision on supporting scientific research, which involves specifically the training of AI algorithms that could be used in healthcare or care of natural persons. And of course, this must be accompanied by an evaluation and further development of existing algorithms and products for such purposes. So perhaps from this part, really the interesting bit is that the regulation explicitly recognizes the importance of using secondary uses of health data for the training of AI algorithms, which is now part of the regulation. Of course, up until now, most companies have relied on various, sometimes dubious legal grounds to do that. In most cases, consent, of course, because in a medical context, it's probably the safest option. There are some prohibitions, so you can't just be doing anything with the health data. For example, professional users won't be able to use health data to increase insurance premiums, a practice that's been known, unfortunately, from the US. They can't engage in detrimental employment, pension, and banking activities. Advertising products or treatments would also be prohibited. So you can't use data also for automating individual decision-making to really automatically diagnose a person. You can't do this, regardless of how good your model might be. you can't use this data to re-identify the natural person beyond what is necessary. And you also, obviously, this is an obvious one, but it comes from the no harm principle. You can't be using this data to develop harmful products. Access to by third parties will be prohibited unless they are authorized, and there is a technical infrastructure to deal with the levels of authorization and granular access controls. And of course, the identity of authorized person must always be indicated in the data permit. So now you will literally have something called data permit, which provides precisely what it is that you can do with the particular data sets that you have access to. Expectedly, of course, we have some exemptions for law enforcement. Now, the regulation places strong emphasis on health data access bodies. So this is a new figure. They basically don't exist, at least not in this form, and certainly not in every EU member state. And the idea of the health data access bodies to promote precisely this secondary use of health-related data and to support access to such data. Member states will be obliged, so every member state will be obliged to set up at least one such body, but they might decide to opt for more than one. And of course, if there is more than one, they will also have to designate a coordinator to basically govern the activities of each of these bodies. And of course, they will have to ensure coordinated participation in the European Health Data Space Board. So the European Health Data Space Board is modeled after known figures from the GDPR, for example, where we have the European Data Protection Board, from the Digital Markets Act, from the Digital Governance Act, and so on and so forth. So this is a typical approach where at the supranational level of the European Union, you have the national representatives of member states gathering together and trying to, harmonize their practices and policy in one way or another. There is a requirement for health data access bodies to have operational independence, because essentially they will be acting as intermediaries of sorts, and this provision is inspired by what we have in the Data Governance Act, where you have similar provisions for data intermediaries who have to take a neutral position with respect to the parties whose access to data they facilitate. There will be an opportunity to actually charge fees for such access. Of course, there's no free lunch, so fees may be charged by health data access bodies. There is, of course, but there are special considerations for SMEs, individual researchers, and public bodies. So you can't charge some exorbitant prices, but of course you can also expect to get access to these services, which can be complex, demanding, computationally intensive, and therefore also financially costly. You can't expect to get them for free. Fees should also cover operational costs in a proportionate, justified, and transparent manner. And of course, there will be many more instruments to complement what we have in the European Health Data Space Regulation. So the Commission, the European Commission likes to give itself the powers to adopt delegating and implementing acts, because it then takes some of the power that is normally granted to member states. It can actually take this power to adopt such acts, and this will be the case for harmonized fee policies in the case of the European Health Data Space. The data minimization principle, I will not go through this in detail in the interest of time, but it's what we all know too well from the General Data Protection Regulation. So you should only be processing so much data as is necessary for the purpose you're trying to achieve, and no more and no less, of course. There will be an anonymized statistical format that is going to be developed, which will allow entities to share anonymous, hopefully, health data sets. The secure processing environment, something that Jonathan hinted at, well, it's actually in the regulation. So the regulation provides that data users should not have, obviously, unrestricted access to just about... what happened? Where did my slides go? All right. So health data access bodies or trusted data holders must provide secure access, and there will be technical and organizational standards that they will need to meet to do this. control of access measures, extraction of non-personal data only, and common security standards are, again, some details. Wait, I think I jumped too quickly. Are some of the measures that you will find in the regulation. Of course, the regulation, as you can imagine, as recent European legislation shows, can't obviously go below 100 pages, so it's quite a read. I would not invite you to read the proposal yet because it's still chaotic. There are still trialogues going on between the Commission, the Council, and the Parliament. But at some point later this year, I hope, we'll get the final version. Controllers and processors, so the well-known distinction from data protection law is kept here, and thank God, the European legislator this time has decided to very clearly allocate the role. So we will not wonder whether a health data holder or a health data access body is a controller or a processor in one case or another. The regulation is straightforward, and it stipulates precisely in which cases, which of these different categories is a controller or a processor, which I think will facilitate also compliance, because you know there are very different sets of obligations that apply to controllers as opposed to data processors. The cross-border infrastructure that I mentioned, so it's all nice that we're talking about cross-border sharing of health data, but without the infrastructure in place, nothing is going to happen. Otherwise, it would have happened already. So there is going to be a health data at EU infrastructure, which should suppose such sharing of secondary sharing of and use of electronic health data. Of course, with respect to privacy by design and by default principles, and the interesting principle bring questions to data instead of moving data. So the idea is that you don't want to transfer data across borders just for the sake of transferring, but rather really try to go to where the data to where the data is with a specific question, ask that question, get the answer, and be done with it, and not just have your data for the sake of having it. You know, you want access to data because you are seeking an answer to a specific question, and this is what this principle embodies. There will be national contact points, again, a standard practice for these type of cross-border infrastructures. A list of authorized participants in the platform, and which includes research infrastructures like EDIX and ERIX. Interoperability with other data spaces, because it's not just the European Health Data Space. We have many other data spaces, and as we've learned from the past few days, we might find unusual combinations of data originating from very many different areas of life. So, for instance, environmental data might have direct implications on interactions with health data, for instance, which means there should also be interoperability between these different data spaces to allow for shared use. There's going to be an EU datasets catalog containing which will contain information about such datasets. So it's in a way a sort of clearance of datasets, so with information about the score, the nature of data, and some of the conditions for making such data available. So you will literally have this catalog where you will be able to access such data for secondary use. There are also some data quality and utility requirements to such data, particularly here, again, focusing on perhaps the data quality and utility label. The idea of this label is really to inform users about the dataset characteristics, as I mentioned, and to provide some transparency between the data holders and the users. The idea of this catalog and the label is to really minimize administrative burden and to facilitate interoperability, because, like I said, that's the greatest challenge we have today. I can tell you, for instance, in Bulgaria, we have an extremely restrictive regime when it comes to using health data for anything else but strict medical research purposes. And we are running a project on setting up a regional data space between Bulgaria, Romania, and Greece. And I can tell you it's a nightmare, because we can't force the regulators, the legislature actually in Bulgaria, to introduce a simple provision into the Health Act, which would allow us to use and to provide such data. So let me just, and I will actually finish with this because the rest is not that important from this regulation. What researchers have to do to get access to these data for the purpose of implementing this regional data space is that they have to work through personal contacts. They have to literally go to physicians they know who can provide them with on-premises access to medical data that they can use to anonymize and create an anonymized version of that data set, of these data on premises, and only then they can take these anonymized data sets with them. I leave it to your imagination to picture how complicated this is and how inefficient and how it actually prevents the ambition of building a regional health data space. So if there's anything that I hope the European Health Data Space Regulation is going to solve, it should be that challenge. Thank you.